That pool and everything inside that fence is the property of the Lakeside Meadows Homeowners Association. You are currently trespassing. I suggest you return to your side of the line before I call the sheriff. The woman's voice was as sharp and unpleasant as the cheap polyester of her too-tight polo shirt. The cursive Karen stitched over her heart, a perfect, almost comical summation of the person inhabiting it. She stood arms crossed, a human roadblock of entitlement and indignation, planted firmly on what the rust-colored steel survey marker hammered into the earth a decade ago by a man I'd paid handsomely for his precision, declared was unequivocally my land. Her shadow fell across the marker, a creeping stain of suburban tyranny, and stretched all the way to the glistening, chlorinated blue of the water that was, at this precise moment, filled with the shrieking children of people I'd never met, all of them enjoying a sunny Saturday on my dime, on my stolen acreage. I looked from her self-satisfied smirk, down to the survey pin, then over to the 40,000-gallon monument to bureaucratic incompetence and theft that they called their community centerpiece, and a cold, quiet resolve began to crystallize in my gut, hard and clear as a diamond. This wasn't just about a fence being a few feet off. They had built their entire summer dream on my property, and this woman, this Karen, had the audacity to threaten me on it. She had no idea who she was dealing with. She had no idea the lengths I would go to, not out of anger, but out of principle. They had one summer of fun. I would have a lifetime of satisfaction. If you're watching this, I know you've probably got your own story about a power-tripping board member or a ridiculous violation notice. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button and tell me about your own HOA nightmare in the comments below. Let me know where you're watching from. It's always good to know you're not alone in these fights. Now let me tell you how this all started, long before Karen and her polo shirt ever trespassed on my patience. It began with a dream of silence. After 25 years as an officer in the Army Corps of Engineers, designing and overseeing construction projects in places where a miscalculation could have catastrophic consequences, all I wanted was a piece of the world where the only thing I had to manage was the growth of oak trees and the level of bourbon in my glass. I bought the land 10 years before my retirement, a beautiful 50-acre tract of rolling North Carolina hills, thick with pine and hardwoods, bordered by a lazy creek on one side. It was my sanctuary in waiting. My wife Sarah and I planned to build a modest house, a large workshop for my woodworking hobby, and spend our golden years watching the deer and not the clock. The first thing I did after closing was commission the most detailed boundary survey money could buy. I walked the entire perimeter with the surveyor, a grizzled old-timer named Miller, as he drove steel pins deep into the ground, their bright orange caps a definitive statement of ownership. "Nobody's going to argue with half-inch rebar sunk 3 feet deep, Colonel," he'd said, and I'd taken him at his word. For 9 years he was right. My land was an island of tranquility, bordered on 3 sides by other large, undeveloped parcels. The fourth side, the eastern boundary, abutted a stretch of old farmland. That was where the trouble began. A developer bought that farm, and signs for Lakeside Meadows, a premier lifestyle community, sprang up overnight. I wasn't thrilled, but property rights are property rights. I had mine, they had theirs. I watched from a distance as they carved roads, laid foundations, and began erecting 100 nearly identical houses. They were building a world of beige siding and mandatory seasonal decorations, a world I wanted no part of, but it was their world, and I had my line in the sand, or in this case, my line of orange-capped steel pins in the dirt. I met the site foreman once, a harried-looking man who assured me they had their own surveys and would be meticulous about respecting the property line. I pointed out my markers to him, visible and clear, and he nodded, scribbled a note on a clipboard, and went back to yelling at a concrete truck. I trusted the process. That was my first mistake. My second was taking a 6-week trip to see my daughter after her husband deployed, to help with our new twin grandchildren. In those 6 weeks, while I was changing diapers and rediscovering the unique exhaustion of caring for newborns, Lakeside Meadows finished their Phase 1 construction, and they built their goddamn pool on my land. The first hint that something was profoundly wrong was the sound. As I turned my truck down the long gravel drive to my property, A sound I'd never heard out here before drifted through the trees, the high-pitched, echoing shrieks of children playing in water, layered over the generic thumping bass of pop music. It was the sound of a public pool on a July afternoon, an acoustic contamination of my hard-earned peace. I parked near the clearing where Sarah and I planned to build our house and walked toward the eastern edge of my property, a growing dread tightening my chest. And then I saw it. It wasn't just a little encroachment. It was a hostile takeover, a massive, kidney-shaped pool surrounded by a sprawling deck of blindingly white concrete was shimmering in the sun. Beyond it stood a clubhouse, a monument of vinyl siding in faux stone, complete with a snack bar and restrooms. The whole complex, the entire resort-style fantasy they'd sold to their residents, was encircled by a 6-foot black aluminum fence. And that fence was a good 75 feet on my side of the property line. I walked numbly along my tree line until I found the first of Miller's survey pins. It was still there, its orange cap unmistakable against the brown pine needles. But now, instead of marking the edge of my woods, it was nestled right against the concrete footing of a fence post. I followed the fence line south. The next pin was the same, and the next. The entire southern length of their multi-million-dollar aquatic center, including the deep end of the pool itself, the pump house, and a significant portion of the clubhouse, was sitting squarely, arrogantly on my land. For a moment, I couldn't process it. The sheer scale of the error, the gall of it, was breathtaking. This wasn't a misplaced flower bed. This was a permanent, commercial-grade facility. I slowly sank to one knee, my hand resting on the cold steel of the survey marker. The sounds of laughter and splashing from the other side of the fence felt like a personal mockery. I pulled out my phone, my hand strangely steady, and began to take pictures. I photographed the pin, the fence, the pool in the background, all in one frame. Then I activated the GPS and location stamping feature on my camera app. My mind, trained by years of military planning, began to shift from shock to strategy. The anger was there, a white-hot coal in my stomach, but I knew anger was a poor advisor. This required precision. This required a plan. I stood up and walked back to my truck, the pop music from their speakers chasing me through the woods. My dream of silence was dead, but a new dream was just beginning to form, the dream of teaching a lesson in consequences so profound, so expensive, and so deeply satisfying that no one involved would ever forget it. They had started a war without a declaration. They would soon learn that I intended to finish it. I spent the rest of the day not in a rage, but in cold, methodical preparation. I dug out the original survey plot from my safe, a huge, beautifully detailed document Miller had created. I unrolled it on the hood of my truck, the crisp paper crackling in the humid air. Using a high-grade compass and my own handheld GPS unit, I began my own initial verification. Every measurement I took confirmed the nightmare. The encroachment wasn't a matter of inches. It was a matter of acres. Nearly a full acre of my prime, creekside property was now occupied by their community hub. The developer hadn't just fudged the line. They had redrawn the map to suit their needs, stealing land to maximize the appeal of their cheap houses. I tried calling the developer's main office. The number listed on their grand Lakeside Meadows sign at the entrance was already disconnected. A quick search online revealed they were a subsidiary of a larger corporation based out of Delaware, masters of the shell game. They had come in, built fast, sold out, and vanished, leaving the newly formed Homeowners Association to hold the bag. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me that the HOA would be the entity I had to confront. An organization of amateurs, likely led by the most power-hungry and least competent among them, suddenly handed the keys to a kingdom built on a foundation of fraud. This was going to be ugly, but as I stood there, the setting sun casting long shadows that made the stolen land look even more alien, I knew I had one supreme advantage. I had the truth, and I had the patience to wield it like a weapon. The next Monday morning, I put on a collared shirt, tucked my survey documents into a leather portfolio, and drove to the address listed for the Lakeside Meadows HOA office. It turned out to be the very clubhouse they had built on my land. The irony was so thick I could almost taste it. I walked past the still wet pool deck, the smell of chlorine and sunscreen hanging in the air, and entered the building. Inside, a woman sat behind a particle board desk, sorting through a mountain of paperwork. She was in her 50s, with a helmet of sprayed blonde hair and a look of perpetual grievance. A nameplate on her desk read, Karen Miller, President. I paused. Miller was the surveyor's name. A common name, surely, but the coincidence felt like a bad omen. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone suggesting that helping me was the last thing she wanted to do. "Yes," I said, keeping my voice level and calm. "My name is John Sterling. I own the 50-acre property that borders this development to the west." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Okay, and?" I placed my portfolio on her desk and opened it to the survey map. "And according to the legally filed survey of my property, a significant portion of your community pool and this very clubhouse are built on my land." I used my finger to trace the clear, professionally delineated property line and then pointed out the window toward the pool. Karen looked at my map, then at me, and then she let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a sound of pure derision. "Sir, I don't know what kind of old hand-drawn map you have there, but our developer provided us with certified architectural plans and surveys. Everything was approved by the county." She gestured to a framed, much smaller, and far less detailed map on the wall behind her. It showed the pool and clubhouse nestled comfortably within the HOA's common area, with a neat, straight property line set far to the west of where it actually was. "That map," I said slowly, "is incorrect. It's fraudulent." "Fraudulent?" She bristled, her posture stiffening. "Are you accusing our developer, a nationally recognized home builder, of fraud? That's a very serious allegation." "It's a very serious theft of land," I countered. "I have the original survey pins, installed 10 years ago to prove it. They are still in the ground. One of them is right outside that window next to your fence." She didn't even glance outside. Instead, she stood up, crossing her arms in the exact pose of belligerent authority I would come to know so well. "Look, Mr. Sterling, this community has invested a great deal of money and pride in our amenities. We just had our grand opening. I'm not going to let some disgruntled neighbor come in here with a fantasy map and try to cause trouble." This was the moment that would later become the opening scene of my story, the confrontation that set everything in motion. "That pool and everything inside that fence is the property of the Lakeside Meadows Homeowners Association," she declared, her voice rising. "You are currently trespassing. I suggest you return to your side of the line before I call the sheriff." The sheer, unadulterated gall of it almost made me laugh. Standing in a building built on my land, she was accusing me of trespassing. It was a masterclass in projection. I calmly closed my portfolio. "Ma'am, my name is on the deed. The county records reflect my ownership of this parcel as delineated by this survey. Your map is a fiction. You have a very, very big problem, and you've just made it my problem. I assure you, you will regret that." I turned and walked out, her sputtering indignation following me into the sunshine. The war had officially been declared, and she had just given me my first and most important piece of evidence, her own willful ignorance. My military training taught me that the first report from the battlefield is almost always wrong, and the first plan of attack rarely survives contact with the enemy. Karen was the enemy, and my initial plan of a reasonable, fact-based discussion had been obliterated. It was time for a new strategy, one based on overwhelming, undeniable evidence and the slow, grinding pressure of the law. My first call was not to a lawyer, but back to Miller, the original surveyor. He was semi-retired, but when I told him the situation, the indignation in his voice was palpable. "They did what? On a plot I marked? Colonel, nobody ignores my pins. Nobody." He agreed to come out the next day. My second action was to purchase a drone. Not a toy, but a high-end quadcopter with a 4K camera and GPS stabilization. This was no longer just about property lines. It was about creating a visual record so compelling that no judge or jury could ignore it. While waiting for Miller to arrive, I spent hours practicing, flying the drone high above the tree line, capturing sweeping cinematic shots of the entire legal complex. From the air, the theft was even more stark. You could see the straight, clear line of my untouched woods, and then the sudden surgical incision of their development, a cancerous growth that had metastasized across the boundary. The drone footage showed kids doing cannonballs into the deep end of my property, families sunbathing on my stolen sod, and the HOA's grounds committee dutifully watering flower pots on land they had absolutely no right to be on. Each image was a digital nail in their future coffin. The next morning, Miller arrived in his beat-up Ford Ranger, looking just as grizzled as I remembered. We walked the line together, his practiced eye missing nothing. He checked his original field notes against the GPS coordinates of his pins. He took new measurements. After 2 hours of meticulous work, he straightened up, took off his hat and wiped his brow. "Colonel," he said, his voice grim, "it's worse than you thought. They didn't just cross the line. They used my northernmost pin as an anchor point and pivoted the entire southern boundary of their common area a full 7 degrees westward. It's not a mistake. You can't make a mistake this big. This was deliberate, calculated fraud by the developer's surveyor." He explained that it was a classic trick. Find one legitimate marker, then fudge the angle over a long distance to steal a wedge-shaped piece of land that widens the farther it goes. They had stolen a sliver at the north end and a huge chunk at the south, where the pool and clubhouse were conveniently located. "I'll draft a new certified survey plat," Miller said, his jaw tight with professional anger. "And I'll write an affidavit stating that the developer's plat is a professional impossibility and constitutes gross negligence at best and criminal fraud at worst. I'll testify to it in any court in this state." With Miller's outrage fueling my own, I finally made the call to a lawyer. I didn't want a bulldog, I wanted a surgeon. I found her in Charlotte, Ms. Evelyn Davies, a woman whose online reviews described her as a quiet nightmare for property developers. During our consultation, I laid everything out on her polished mahogany conference table. My original deed, Miller's survey, the new drone footage playing on a laptop, and the story of my confrontation with Karen. Ms. Davies watched, listened, and didn't interrupt once. A small, knowing smile played on her lips. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice calm and precise, "this is one of the most egregious cases of encroachment I've ever seen. And their HOA president's response is a gift from the litigation gods." She advised a course of action that appealed to the strategic part of my brain. "We don't just sue them tomorrow," she explained. "We let them dig their own hole deeper. We let them operate the pool for the entire summer. Every day they use it, they are committing a continuous act of trespass. Every dollar they spend on maintenance, chemicals, and staff for that pool is a dollar they are spending to improve your property. We will document it all. We will let their arrogance and sense of ownership become our greatest weapon." It was a brilliant, vicious strategy. It meant I had to endure an entire summer of listening to their parties, of watching them enjoy my stolen land. But it also meant that when the time came to act, our case would be ironclad, and the damages would be astronomical. "Go home, Mr. Sterling," she said, gathering my documents. "Be a good neighbor. Don't say a word. Just watch and document. Your patience will be rewarded handsomely." I walked out of her office into the city haze, feeling a sense of profound clarity. The trap was being set. All I had to do was wait for them to walk into it. The summer that followed was a masterclass in forced restraint. Every weekend, the sounds of Lakeside Meadows pool parties washed over my property. I'd sit on my porch, ostensibly reading a book, but actually making detailed notes in a logbook. Saturday, July 14th, 14:30 hours. Approximately 50 to 60 individuals present. Loud music. Party rock anthem. Grill is active on clubhouse patio. 2 uniformed pool attendants on duty. It felt like conducting surveillance for a military operation. My drone, which I nicknamed the Witness, became my most valuable asset. I'd send it up at dawn before anyone arrived, capturing pristine, high-resolution video of the entire facility. I filmed the pool cleaners vacuuming the bottom, the chemical delivery trucks making their drops, the landscapers planting petunias in beds that were legally mine. Each video file was meticulously labeled and backed up to a secure cloud server, a growing mountain of digital evidence. But the HOA, emboldened by my silence, decided to go on the offensive. The first notice appeared tacked to a tree on my driveway. It was an official-looking letterhead from the Lakeside Meadows HOA, signed by Karen. It was a notice of violation concerning the grass on my property, which was apparently in excess of the community standard of 4 inches. It came with a threat of a $50 fine if not rectified within 7 days. I had to laugh. They were trying to enforce their petty suburban rules on my 50 acres of natural woodland, all while occupying a chunk of it illegally. It was a classic bully tactic. When you're in the wrong on the big things, start attacking the small things. I forwarded a photo of the notice to Miss Davies. Her reply was swift. Perfect. Do not comply. Do not even respond. Let them send more. This is harassment, and it establishes a pattern of bad faith. We'll add it to the pile. A week later, a second notice arrived, this time with a $100 fine. Then a third for a derelict vehicle, my perfectly functional 1985 John Deere tractor, being visible from their community area. The fines escalated. $200, $500. They were inventing violations, manufacturing a case against me to paint me as the problem neighbor, the aggressor. Karen was building a paper trail, but she didn't realize it was for her own prosecution. Meanwhile, I started my own quiet counterintelligence operation. I made it a point to be visible, but non-confrontational. I'd work on my property near the fence line, clearing brush or splitting wood, always within earshot of the pool. I wanted the residents to see me, to realize that a human being lived on the other side of the fence they so casually ignored. Some would stare. A few would offer a hesitant wave, which I would return with a polite nod. I was planting a seed of cognitive dissonance in their minds. How could the monster Karen described in her newsletters be this quiet man who simply worked on his land? One afternoon, a young boy's frisbee sailed over the fence and landed at my feet. A moment later, a man in his late 30s appeared at the fence, looking apologetic. "Hey, sorry about that," he said. "Can I get that back?" "Of course," I said, picking it up and handing it to him. "No harm done." "Thanks, I'm Tom," he said, extending a hand through the fence. "We just moved in a few months ago. You must be our neighbor." "John Sterling," I replied, shaking his hand. "Welcome to the neighborhood, sort of." He laughed. "Yeah, I guess you're not technically in the meadows." Say, I hope the noise from the pool isn't too much of a bother. It was the opening I'd been waiting for. "I'm a patient man," I said, choosing my words carefully. "I'm just waiting for everyone to figure out who owns the land this pool is on." Tom's friendly expression faltered. "What do you mean?" "It's the HOA common area." "Is it?" I asked gently. "Have you ever looked at the official county plat map for this area? Not the one the developer gave you, but the real one, down at the county records office." A flicker of unease crossed his face. "No. Why?" "You should," I said, giving him a small, knowing smile. "It's very educational. Have a good afternoon, Tom." I turned and walked back toward my woods, leaving him standing at the fence, looking from me to the pool and back again, a question now planted firmly in his mind. The first crack in their united front had appeared. Tom was the first domino, and I had a feeling he wouldn't be the last. The seeds of doubt were sown, and just like the fines piling up on my side of the fence, they were about to bear fruit. Tom became my unofficial inside source. A week after our Frisbee incident, he approached me again at the fence line, this time without his kids. He looked worried. "I did what you said," he began, his voice low. "I went down to the county records office. I pulled the original plat for your land in the parcel the developer bought." He held up his phone, showing me photos of the documents. "They don't match. The map they showed us at closing, it's different. It shows the common area as being much bigger." "I know," I said calmly. "The map they showed you is a work of fiction, designed to sell houses. The reality is on the county record." Tom ran a hand through his hair, his mind clearly racing. "So this whole area, the pool, it's yours?" "Every square inch," I confirmed. "The deep end, the pump house, half the clubhouse, all of it." The color drained from his face. "My God, we're all paying HOA dues for an asset the HOA doesn't even own. We're paying for maintenance, insurance. We could be liable." He had connected the dots faster than I expected. "That's exactly right," I said. "And your HOA president, Karen, has known about it since the beginning of the summer. I showed her my survey personally. Tom shook his head in disbelief. She told everyone you were just some crank trying to extort the community. She's been sending out newsletters painting you as a villain, saying you're filing frivolous complaints. She's projecting, I said. It's a classic tactic. She knows the HOA was duped by the developer, but admitting it would mean admitting her own incompetence for not doing her due diligence. It's easier to create a boogeyman. A small group of residents had started to gather on the pool deck behind Tom, watching our conversation with curiosity. Karen was among them, her arms crossed, her face a mask of suspicion. Tom glanced over his shoulder, then turned back to me. "What are you going to do?" he asked in a near whisper. "My lawyer has a plan," I said, my voice just loud enough for those on the deck to potentially hear. "But it requires a bit more time. In the meantime, you and your neighbors might want to start asking some hard questions at the next HOA meeting. Questions about fiduciary responsibility. Questions about the legality of the community's primary asset. Ask to see the certified survey the HOA has on file. I guarantee you she can't produce one that matches the one at the county courthouse." With that, I gave him a final nod and retreated to my house, leaving him to face the fallout. The conversation had its intended effect. Over the next few weeks, the atmosphere at the pool changed. The carefree party vibe was replaced by a palpable tension. I'd see small groups of residents huddled together, talking in low voices and glancing nervously toward my property. Tom, it turned out, was a CPA and had started a small, informal audit of the HOA's finances with a few other concerned homeowners. He told me they had discovered that Karen had already spent several $1,000s of HOA funds on a lawyer to send me the harassing violation letters, all without board approval. The community was splitting into factions: the Karen, who blindly believed the president's narrative, and the Toms, who were starting to see the truth. The alliance was forming, not because I had recruited them, but because Karen's own lies and aggression had driven them to seek answers. My lawyer was ecstatic. "This is better than I could have hoped for," Ms. Davies told me over the phone. "An internal rebellion based on the facts you provided them. It completely undermines the HOA's ability to present a united front. When we file, the board will be under pressure not just from us, but from their own members." The final piece of the puzzle fell into place in late August. Miller, the surveyor, called me. "Colonel, you're not going to believe this. I was talking to a buddy over at the county planning office, the surveyor who signed off on the developer's fraudulent plat, a guy named Peterson. He just had his license suspended, got caught doing the same thing, fudging boundaries for a developer down in Wake County. It's a pattern. The man's a professional crook." This was the smoking gun. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a crime, committed by a known criminal, and Karen had hitched the entire HOA's wagon to his fraudulent work. The summer was drawing to a close. The children's laughter around the pool was starting to sound less like a party and more like a ticking clock. The trap was fully set. All that was left was to spring it. Labor Day weekend was the grand finale of the Lakeside Meadow summer. The HOA threw a massive end-of-summer bash, complete with a live band, catered barbecue, and what looked like half the county's supply of inflatable pool toys. The music was louder, the crowd bigger, and the general atmosphere more defiantly festive than ever. It was as if Karen was trying to drown out the growing dissent with sheer volume. From my porch, I watched and logged it all, the final entry in my summer-long chronicle of trespass. The Witness made its final flight, capturing the scene in glorious 4K, a perfect before picture for the after that was to come. The following Tuesday, the day after the last hot dog was eaten and the last sunburn was acquired, Ms. Davies filed the lawsuit. It wasn't just a filing, it was a coordinated strike. At 9 a.m., a process server walked into the clubhouse on my land and handed a thick stack of documents directly to Karen. At 9:05 a.m., Ms. Davies sent a copy of the entire filing, including all exhibits: Miller's damning affidavit, the side-by-side map comparisons, the drone footage, the log of harassing violation notices, and the news about the fraudulent surveyor's license suspension, to every single homeowner in Lakeside Meadows via a registered email list Tom had discreetly provided. At 9:10 a.m., a press release was sent to every major news outlet in the state. The demand letter at the heart of the lawsuit was a work of art, brutal in its simplicity. It laid out the indisputable evidence and gave the HOA board exactly 30 days to choose one of two options. Option A, purchase the zero point 0.9 acres of encroached land from me. The price was not market value. The price was 10 times market value, a figure calculated to cover the value of the land, the value of the illegal improvements they had made to it, which were now legally mine under the laws of accession, punitive damages for the willful trespass, and compensation for the harassment and slander I had endured. The total was a staggering number, far beyond what any HOA could ever afford. Option B, ejectment and restoration. They were to immediately cease all use of the property, remove every single structure, the pool, the concrete deck, the clubhouse, the pump house, the fence, every light fixture and sprinkler head, and restore the land to its original condition at their sole expense. Furthermore, they were to pay a separate, more modest sum for damages related to the summer of trespassing and the legal fees I had incurred. We knew they couldn't afford option A. Option B was designed to be their only way out, a path of complete and total surrender. The effect was instantaneous and cataclysmic. My phone started buzzing with texts from Tom. "Holy cow! Email just landed. People are losing their minds. Karen just came out of the clubhouse. She looks like she's seen a ghost. Emergency meeting called for tomorrow night. Residents only. Mandatory attendance." The community, which had been slowly fracturing, now split wide open. The online neighborhood forum exploded into a digital civil war. The Toms were posting links to the county records and demanding accountability. The Karens were screeching about community solidarity and accusing me of trying to destroy their property values. But the evidence was too overwhelming. The side-by-side maps, the surveyor's affidavit, it was all there in black and white and high-definition color for every homeowner to see. They couldn't hide from it. Karen's strategy of control through misinformation had been vaporized by a single, perfectly executed legal broadside. She had built her entire presidency on the foundation of that pool, and now she was about to be drowned in it. The stage was set for the emergency meeting, a showdown that would determine the fate of Lakeside Meadows and seal Karen's downfall. I wouldn't be there in person, but I knew I would have the best seat in the house. The night of the emergency meeting, the clubhouse, my clubhouse, was packed to the gills. Every folding chair was taken, and residents stood 3 deep along the walls. The air was thick with anger, fear, and betrayal. I was at home, my phone on the table in front of me, receiving a play-by-play from Tom, who had secured a seat in the front row. "Standing room only," his first text read. "You could cut the tension with a knife. Karen and the board are at a table up front. She looks furious." The meeting began with Karen taking the floor. According to Tom, she came out swinging, not with facts, but with pure emotion and invective. "She's calling you an extortionist," Tom texted, "a greedy, vindictive old man who's been planning this all along to ruin our community." She waved a copy of our lawsuit in the air, calling it a frivolous and insulting document filled with lies. She claimed my surveyor was a disgruntled hack and that their developers' plans were the only ones that mattered. She was trying to rebuild her wall of lies, but it was too late. The residents now had the blueprints to see right through it. Tom, along with 2 other homeowners, a retired engineer and a paralegal, had come prepared. When Karen finally paused for breath, Tom stood up. "She's trying to shut him down," the text came rapidly. "But people are shouting, 'Let him speak.'" The crowd's sentiment had turned. Tom, calm and collected, walked to the front and addressed not Karen, but his neighbors. He held up his phone, displaying the 2 different plat maps side by side on a presentation app he'd prepared. "This is the map the developer gave us," he said, his voice carrying through the tense room. "And this," he swiped, "is the official map on file at the county courthouse. They are not the same. This isn't a matter of opinion. It's a matter of public record." He then brought up the information about Peterson, the fraudulent surveyor. The man who signed our plat map had his license suspended for doing this exact thing to another community. We were scammed. Mr. Sterling didn't cause this problem. He uncovered it. Karen tried to interrupt, her voice shrill. "This is privileged HOA information. You are colluding with him against your own community." But the dam of her authority had broken. The paralegal stood up and asked a pointed question. "Karen, the lawsuit alleges you spent over $5,000 on legal fees to harass Mr. Sterling with violation notices. Our bylaws state that any non-budgeted expenditure over $1,000 requires a full board vote. Can you please show us the minutes from that meeting where the vote was held? Chaos, Tom texted. She's sputtering. The treasurer is shaking his head. No vote ever happened. The engineer then stood. I have a question about due diligence. When Mr. Sterling first brought this to your attention in June, why wasn't the first step to commission an independent survey to verify the boundary? That would have cost a few $1,000s. Instead, you embarked on a campaign of harassment that has now exposed every single one of us to a multi-million-dollar liability. That sounds like gross negligence. The room erupted. People who had paid their life savings for these homes were realizing the depth of the hole Karen had dug for them. She was cornered, her lies exposed, her power evaporating before her eyes. And then, she snapped. The final text from Tom was almost poetic. Total meltdown. She's screaming, pointing at me, calling me a traitor, screaming at the board for not backing her up. She just threatened to fine everyone in this room for insubordination. It's over. She's finished. Right on cue, the back doors of the clubhouse opened, and a news crew from a Charlotte station, alerted by my lawyer's press release and the promise of fireworks, slipped inside, their camera light flicking on. They caught the final, ugly moments of Karen's reign, her face contorted in a mask of rage, her finger jabbing at her own residence, her voice cracking as she shrieked about disrespect and lawsuits. It was a public, humiliating, and beautifully self-inflicted end to her tyranny. The camera kept rolling as the residents, in a spontaneous, unofficial vote, demanded her immediate resignation. Her reign of error was over, broadcast for the entire state to see. The fallout from the meeting was swift and decisive. Within 48 hours, the HOA board, minus Karen, who had resigned in disgrace, formally requested a meeting with Ms. Davies. The tone was no longer one of belligerence, but of desperate supplication. They knew they were beaten. They had no legal leg to stand on, their own members were in open revolt, and their disastrous financial situation was now a matter of public record. I did not attend the meeting. Ms. Davies handled it, reporting back to me that afternoon. They're broken, she said, a note of grim satisfaction in her voice. They can't even begin to consider option A. They barely have enough in their reserve fund to cover the damages in option B. They've agreed to everything, full removal, full restoration, and payment for all damages and legal fees. There was no more negotiation. There was only surrender. The HOA had to take out a massive special assessment on all its members to cover the costs. A Karen tax, as Tom later told me the residents had grimly nicknamed it. The justice was not just in the victory, but in the fact that the financial burden fell squarely on the community that had, for a summer, either actively or passively benefited from the theft of my land. The contracts were signed within the week. The first sign of my victory was not a check in the mail, but the arrival of a large yellow excavator trundling down the road and parking just outside the black aluminum fence. A demolition crew, contracted and paid for by the Lakeside Meadows HOA, began setting up their equipment. The day they started work was a crisp, clear morning in early October. I poured myself a cup of coffee and walked to the edge of my property, stopping at the survey pin that had started it all. I didn't feel triumphant or giddy. I felt a profound, quiet sense of rightness, of an imbalance being corrected. The first step was the draining of the pool. They hooked up a massive pump and a thick hose snaked over the concrete deck, spewing a torrent of chlorinated water into a nearby storm drain. I watched the water level drop, inch by inch. The bright, inviting blue receded, revealing the white plaster shell beneath. The water line left a faint, dirty ring around the edge, like a bathtub after the water has gone. It was a strangely symbolic sight, the draining of their summer fantasy, the receding of their arrogance. As I stood there, a car I recognized slowed on the community road behind the fence. It was Karen's oversized SUV, now packed to the roof with boxes. She was moving out, unable to face the community she had bankrupted and misled. She stopped the car directly across from me. For a long moment, we just looked at each other through the fence. Her face, stripped of its usual sneer of authority, was just tired and full of hate. She didn't say a word. She just stared, her eyes burning with a venom that could no longer hurt me. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply gave her a slow, deliberate nod. It was a gesture of finality, of acknowledgement, an admission that the game was over, and I had won. She slammed her foot on the accelerator and sped away, leaving a puff of exhaust hanging in the air. A moment later, a foreman gave a signal, and a worker with a massive jackhammer climbed into the empty shallow end of the pool. The machine roared to life, and the first deafening blows echoed across the valley, shattering the concrete shell. The sound was brutal, violent, and to my ears it was the sweetest music I had ever heard. It was the sound of my land being liberated. It was the sound of justice. The demolition took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of glorious, righteous noise. Jackhammers pulverized the concrete deck and pool shell into manageable chunks. The excavator, with its massive steel jaws, chewed through the clubhouse walls, reducing the vinyl siding and faux stone to piles of debris. They tore down the fence, post by post, and rolled up the wire like a discarded fishing net. Every trace of Lakeside Meadows' stolen paradise was systematically dismantled and hauled away in a procession of rumbling dump trucks. I watched the entire process from my porch, my logbook now serving as a place for sketching woodworking designs instead of recording trespasses. Tom would often join me in the evenings, bringing a couple of beers, and we'd watch the progress together. "You know," he said one evening, as we watched a crane lift the last truss from the clubhouse roof, "in a weird way, you saved this community." I raised an eyebrow. "By bankrupting it?" "No," he said, "by exposing it. Karen was running this place like her own personal fiefdom. The finances were a mess, the rules were arbitrary, and nobody dared to question her. You forced everyone to wake up and take responsibility. The new board is transparent. We have committees that actually work. People are engaged. You didn't just get your land back, you gave us our community back." It was a perspective I hadn't considered. My fight for my own property had inadvertently triggered a democratic coup next door. The removal of the physical encroachment had led to the removal of a cancerous authority. As the last truck of debris pulled away, all that remained was a gaping wound in the earth, a vast pit of red clay scarred with the imprint of what had been there. The final phase of the agreement was restoration. The HOA hired a landscaping company, a different one this time, thoroughly vetted, to fill the hole, grade the land back to its natural contour, and cover the entire acre with topsoil and a blend of native grass seed and wildflower mix. They worked for another week, their small tractors buzzing back and forth, healing the scar they had been paid to create. The day they finished, the foreman walked over to me, hat in hand. "All done, Mr. Sterling. We hydroseeded it, so you should see some growth in a couple of weeks. The bill is settled with the HOA. The land is yours again." I walked out onto the newly seeded earth. It was soft under my boots. The air smelled of fresh dirt and possibility. I could see the creek again, its path no longer obstructed by a building. The 50 acres were whole once more. The money from the damages settlement arrived, a wire transfer that covered Miss Davies' fees with a significant amount left over. It wasn't a windfall, it was restitution. It was the price of my stolen peace, my summer of vigilance, and the principle I had refused to compromise. Sarah and I finally started construction on our house that spring, on the clearing I had chosen so many years ago. The contractors we hired were meticulous about the property line. From our new front porch, we could look out over the restored acre. The grasses grew thick and tall, dotted with the purple of ironweed and the yellow of black-eyed Susans. Deer and wild turkeys wandered through, reclaiming the space. The Lakeside Meadows community, under its new leadership, became a surprisingly good neighbor. There were no more violation notices, no more passive-aggressive newsletters. The new HOA president, a reasonable woman who was a retired school teacher, made a point of introducing herself and giving me her personal cell number in case there were ever any issues. Sometimes when I'm out walking the property line, I'll stop at that spot where the deep end of the pool used to be. The ground is solid, covered in life. There is no trace of the concrete tomb that once sat there. The only sound is the wind in the pines and the gurgle of the creek. My silence has returned. I won back my land. I defeated a petty tyrant and dismantled her corrupt machine. But the greatest victory wasn't the demolition or the money. It was this: standing on my whole, undivided land, feeling the quiet satisfaction of a battle fought with patience, strategy, and an unwavering belief in what is right. It's a peace that no amount of money can buy and no HOA can ever take away.